Are live. Well, good morning, good evening, or afternoon, depending on what part of the globe you're on and what time zone you are in. I am your ever gracious host, Skeptically Speaking. Thank you so much for joining us. We've been reading through this book, The Founding Myth: Why Nationalism is Un-American. Why Christian nationalism is un-American. If I can get my camera, there we go. It's unfortunately backwards. So now I got to figure out how to mirror. Do not mirror it. Thank you. You can read it now. The Founding Myth: Why Christian Nationalism is Un-American by Andrew Seidel. If you'd like to order your own copy, please order your copy on Amazon or wherever books are sold. I think he would very much appreciate it. Chapter 19, Unoriginal, Tribal, and 6th, 8th, and 9th Commandments. Commandment number 6, you shall not murder, or thou shalt not kill, KJV. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. This is in Deuteronomy 5, Exodus 20. George Carlin. When will Jesus bring the pork chops? Just think about Irish history, the Middle East, the Crusades, the Inquisition, our own abortion doctor killings, and yes, the World Trade Center, to see how seriously religious people take thou shalt not kill. Apparently, to religious folks, especially to the truly devout, murder is negotiable. It just depends on who's doing the killing and who's getting killed. By George Carlin. Virtually all that can be said of Commandment 6, 8, and 9 can be said of Commandment 7, the adultery commandment. All four are similar in structure, language, concision, and application. According to scholars, several of the oldest and most significant manuscripts of the Decalogue actually list the adultery commandment before the murder commandment. This ordering is echoed in the King James Version of the New Testament in several places, including in Jesus' own words to his apostles. Thou knowest the commandments: do not commit adultery, do not kill, do not steal. However, the adultery's ban influence on America's founding requires additional discussion, so it will be treated separately in the next chapter. It is not until halfway through God's most moral precepts that we begin to see, if not influence, at least some resemblance to the American law and government. That these few commandments resemble some of our laws does not necessarily mean that they influence those laws or the founding of this country. Prohibition on theft, perjury, and murder are vital, so much so that every successful society agrees with them. These biblical commandments fail to prove America's Judeo-Christian foundations because they are not uniquely or originally Judeo-Christian, and as formulated in these commandments, they are not as moral as people suppose. First, these principles are not exclusive or original to Judeo-Christianity. They are universal principles. They are that all humans understand and arrive at regardless of their participation in the Judeo-Christian religion. This includes cultures and religions that predate Judaism, even holds true within Judaism itself. As Christopher Hitchens pointed out, my mother's Jewish ancestors are told that until they got to Sinai, they'd been dragging themselves around the desert under the impression that adultery, murder, and theft, and perjury were all fine, and they get to Mount Sinai only to be told it's not kosher after all. Interestingly, the biblical God does not base his rules on these universal moral qualities. Instead, the Ten Commandments unmistakably rest even the universal accepted prohibitions as against murder, theft, etc., on the sanction of the divinity proclaimed at the beginning of the text, as the Supreme Court noted in a ruling against governmental displays of the Ten Commandments. This puts the commandments on shaky ground. As we've seen, it is at best only Moses' word that vouches for the divine origins of the tablets. Formulations of these rules in other cultures are actually based on morality, not on the tenuous authority of the divine character. Which are better, rules that exist because they are valuable precepts for humanity, or rules that exist because a dictator decreed them? Other earlier legal codes in the religion of the Levant contained similar prohibitions, as did other religions. Although Christians often talk of Jesus' humility and their desire to emulate him, it is monstrously arrogant to claim that a universal human principle belongs to one religion, especially a relatively young religion. This belief marries that arrogance to ignorance of other cultures, countries, religions, and idea. Second, America's statutory versions of these universal principles apply to everyone. The biblical God's commandments do not. Judeo-Christian limits the application of these principles to other believers, destroying their universality. George Carlin's quip on page 208, "It just depends on who's doing the killing and who's getting killed," is accurate. The God of the Bible allows murder if the victim believes in a different God. The biblical commandments protect only other believers. You may not murder, steal from, or bear false witness against other members of our group. This is why the first 5 commandments deal with God's supremacy and how he should be worshipped, so that believers can recognize each other, the people to whom the final commandments apply. The in-group application of the final commandments is why rather obvious rules against murder, stealing, and lying are not listed first. The commandments in their original Hebrew support this in-group interpretation. They were set down with the art of writing was in its infancy, and were later translated from Hebrew texts that do not have commas, periods, capital letters, or breaks for paragraphs. Translators and editors made the grammatical and punctuation decisions we see today long after the originals were written. This may seem trivial, but punctuation, capitals, and breaks clarify the writing. Unpunctuated or poorly punctuated writing, like the original commandments, can easily confuse the writer's messages. Examples abound, including this popular one. "A woman without her man is nothing." Add some varying punctuation to this and you can get 2 contradictory meanings. "A woman without her man is nothing." "A woman without her man is nothing." Had this been a biblical sentence in need of punctuation, it's not difficult to guess which punctuation early Bible scribes, men writing the laws of a patriarchal religion, would have chosen. Punctuation can save lives. "Let's eat, Grandpa." "Let's eat, Grandpa." Had the voice Moses in the wilderness, a voice he heard after starving for weeks during forced desert march, bothered to invent punctuation for the Hebrews, thousands of lives might have been saved over the millennia. Here's how Commandment 6 through 9 reads without the added punctuation. "You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor." The preferred modern interpretation breaks this into 4 separate sentences, with the neighbor clause, your neighbor, modifying only the lying prohibition. Another viable interpretation, one that makes more sense given the surrounding books of the Bible, is "you shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor." The alteration is subtle, but it completely changes the meaning. In the former interpretation, all the prohibitions except lying are absolute. One can lie, just not to his neighbor. In the latter interpretation, neighbor limits all the prohibited acts. You can steal, kill, cheat, or lie as long as the victim is not your neighbor. Here's a parallel example, something a first-grade teacher might tell a student. Again, punctuation changes the meaning. Thank you so much. "Do not cross the street. Do not talk to strangers. Do not trick or treat without your parents." Do not cross the street. Do not talk to strangers. Do not trick or treat without your parents. In the first example, the child cannot ever cross the street. The child can never talk to strangers, but the child can go trick-or-treating so as long as the parents are present. The punctuation gives the sentence an incorrect meaning, of course. The child may cross the street to talk to strangers with her parents. Otherwise, she'd never go anywhere or meet anyone. In the second example, punctuation clarifies the message. She can do any of the 3 activities as long as her parents are present. The more accurate interpretation of these 4 commandments might be, do not kill your neighbor, or commit adultery with your neighbor, or steal from your neighbor, or bear false witness against your neighbor. Under this interpretation, which not all scholars agree with, the prohibitions are not applied equally. They are applied only to one's neighbor. So it is permissible to kill and steal as long as you don't kill your neighbor or steal from your neighbor. There are different rules for people depending on their status as a neighbor. I've hinted at this interpretation several times already, and it makes learning who one's neighbor is all the more important, which is why the first 5 commandments help identify neighbors before explaining that you should not kill them. Do not worship my God, only my God. Do not curse my God or do not respect him. Do you worship and rest when my God says to? Do you obey your parents and priests who tell you to worship my God? If so, you're my neighbor, and it's important that I not kill you. Our modern broad minded interpretation of neighbor encompasses all humans, but that was not the meaning for Moses and his tribe. Immediately after receiving the first set of commandments, Moses descends from the mount to find his followers violating the idol worshiping prohibition. Enraged, Moses destroys the only physical evidence that a God exists and relays a command from Yahweh to his priests to kill your brother, your friend, and your neighbor. That's right. I remember he did do that. Moses and Yahweh, because these neighbors have betrayed their God and worshipped an idol, essentially forfeiting their status as neighbors by breaking one of those commandments, meant to identify those to whom the latter commandments apply. Think about that for a little bit. Leviticus 19:18 provides another contemporaneous contextual definition of the word neighbor. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against any of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. The 2 verses earlier, in another example, you shall not go around as a slander among your people, and you shall not stand against the blood of your neighbor. God also tells the Israelites that they should occasionally expunge debts held against a neighbor, not extracting it in of a neighbor who is a member of the community. Of course, you can still recover debts from foreigners. This, according to the biblical text itself, neighbor only refers to fellow believers. The in-group interpretation of these commandments make it even more sense, given the events that follow the covenant. Shortly after receiving the commandments, the Israelites go on a killing spree. According to the Bible, they commit genocide after genocide, more than 70 all told. Thou shalt not kill is a contradiction that cannot be reconciled with the genocides the Israelites inflict on the inhabitants of the region, unless their killings are not murder because the victims did not worship Yahweh. All the groups of people they destroyed were people who did not worship their God. The Israelites did not violate the divine prohibition on murder because that commandment applied only to other Israelites. This interpretation also makes more sense given the sheer level of brutality and violence in the Bible. There is much more bloodshed it's almost as if there are no limits on murder at all. In The Better Angels of Our Nature, Pinker makes the point so beautifully that it is worth reproducing in whole. Quote, the Bible depicts a world that, seen through modern eyes, is staggering in its savagery. People enslave, rape, murder members of their immediate families. Warlords slaughter civilians indiscriminately, including the children. Women are bought, sold, and plundered like sex toys. And Yahweh tortures and massacres people by the hundreds of thousands for trivial disobedience, or for no reason at all. These atrocities are neither isolated nor obscure. They implicate all the major characters of the Old Testament, the ones that Sunday school children draw with crayons, and they fall into continuous plot line that stretches for millennia. After Adam and Eve, through Noah, the patriarchs, Moses, Joshua, Judges, Saul, David, and Solomon. Let's see. According to the biblical scholars Raymond Schwager, the Hebrew Bible contains over 600 passages that explicitly talk about nations, kings, or individuals attacking, destroying, and killing others, aside from approximately 1,000 verses in which Yahweh himself appears as direct executioner of violent punishments, and the many texts in which the Lord delivers the criminal to the punisher's sword. In over 100 other passages, Yahweh expressly gives the command to kill people. Matthew White, a self-described, I've never heard of atrocitologist, wow, who keeps a database with the estimated death tolls of history's major wars, massacres, and genocides, counts about 1.2 million deaths from mass killings that are specifically enumerated in the Bible. He excludes the 500,000 casualties in the war between Judah and Israel, described in 2 Chronicles 13, because he considers the body count historically implausible. Jesus. The victims of the Noachian flood would add another 20 million or so to the total. The Sanhedrin, the high religious court, interpreted these rules in this exclusive in-group manner before Jesus entered the scene. According to this court, an Israelite was not guilty of murder unless he killed another Israelite. Hmm. Mm-mm-mm. This guy has some thoughts about. I have to tell you, this guy. I grew up in Christianity from the age of 1. There is not a verse in the Bible I haven't read at least once. Not a single one. I've read through the Bible several times. It was literally required in the Christian school that I attended. So, yeah, I understand the Bible pretty well. But I guess it depends on your interpretation of it. Isn't the Bible great? You can literally make the Bible say whatever you want it to say at any given time. Uh, anyway, don't smart off to my moderator, please. You can disrespect me, just don't disrespect my moderator. Thank you. Getting a little spicy in the chat. Where was I? Even if he intended to kill a non-Israelite heathen, the act was not murder. The Jewish Encyclopedia is explicit on this point, explaining that under some laws, the Gentile is not a neighbor. How nice. Far from the universal human meaning bestowed upon it by modern believers, neighbor means your clan, your tribe, your brother, believer, and no one else. The basis of Judeo-Christian morality and ethics is the clan. The tribe is more important than morality. People who are different are lesser. Sounds like MAGA, isn't it? Oh, yes. Those who excuse their freedom of religion to worship differently will be treated as non-humans. Does that sound like an American principle? Christian apologists seek to paint Jesus as redefining neighbor to include all humans. No. But the Bible tells a different story. When Jesus sent out his 12 apostles to convince people that he was God, he didn't send them out to everyone. Do not go among the Gentiles or enter any town of the Samaritans. Go rather to the lost sheep of Israel. Pretty exclusive, wouldn't you say? I mean, think about it. If you had the most important message ever, bar none, you had the most important message to give to the people, why the hell would you not tell your apostles to go everywhere, talk to anyone you see? Right? This is the worst game of telephone ever devised. Not exactly an equal opportunity preacher. When Jesus gives his new commandment to love one another, he does not extend it beyond brother believers. He says one another, and he is commanding only his closest followers, the 12 apostles. He gives them that command so that everyone will know that you are disciples if you have love for one another. This is not an expansion of loving your neighbor into other religions. It is just a command that Jesus' closest followers love each other. If you were to say at your next office meeting to 12 coworkers or subordinates, be nice to each other, no one would reasonably think you were addressing the statement or anyone outside that room. So why treat Jesus' words differently? One book attributed to John the Evangelist reiterates the believer must love believer point several times. The author even specifically says that believers only need to love other believers. Quote, whoever says, I am in the light while hating a brother or sister is still in darkness. Whoever loves a brother or sister lives in the light. And in such a person, there is no cause for stumbling. But whoever hates another believer is in the darkness, walks in the darkness, and does not know the way to go. Other authorities, some ancient, leave out the word sister. Either way, the command to love one can only be read as an in-group command. The next chapter of 1 John specifically interprets the love your neighbor commandment to mean brothers. Again, other authorities leave out the sisters. For this is the message you have heard from the beginning, that we should love one another. We must not be like Cain, who was from the evil one and murdered his brother. Do not be astonished, brothers and sisters, that the world hates you. We know that we have passed from death to life because we love one another. All who hate a brother or sister are murderers, and we ought to lay down our lives for one another. How does God's love abide in anyone who has the world's good and sees a brother or sister in need and yet refuses to help? The world is other people, and believers are not commanded to love them, only one another and their brothers and sisters. I know this for a fact. I saw this firsthand. I saw the pastor that I was raised under literally refuse to give money to a person or even offer to buy him a meal because he was convinced that this person was going to use drugs. From the pulpit, he would say, we are not to feed the world. We are to help people within the church, help our own brothers and sisters out. Literally said that from the pulpit. This was not, he didn't misspeak, he didn't misquote. He said this several times. In the good Lord, in the 30 years I was in that church, I heard a version of this over and over and over again. So yeah, Andrew Seidel is pretty spot on when it comes to that. Thank you for joining us. Please keep tapping that screen. I love the taps. I forgot to set a goal, didn't I? I don't know if I can do that now. It's probably too late. Activities, live events. Well, that's all right. Maybe next time. Okay. But join the skeptics team. Become a skeptic. We'd love to have you. We also have a Discord too. Okay. Now I've gotten so off track, I forgot where I left off. The world is other people, and believers are not commanded to love them, only one another and their brothers and sisters. The books of both Matthew and Mark tell of a woman, a non-Israelite, with a sick daughter. She asked Jesus to cure the child. Jesus ignores her, and the disciples urge him to send her away, but she persists. Finally, Jesus chides the woman, saying, "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to dogs." In other words, miracles are for my people, my neighbors, my children, not for the dogs who worship other gods. It is not until after she has professed her faith in him, until after she calls Jesus Master and Lord for the third time, that he relents, noting, "Woman, great is your faith." Jesus deigns to save the innocent, sick child only because the mother converts and declares her obedience to and belief in him. How sick, how sad. What if she hadn't? What if she had said, "Well, I already have my belief. I just want you to heal my daughter"? What sick, twisted fuck would do something like that? Until you call me Lord and Master, I won't be doing shit for you. Must be nice. Must be nice to be the king. The closest Jesus gets to a command for universal love is in his Sermon on the Mount. He says to love your enemies and lays out his version of the golden rule in Matthew 7, in which neighbor has been interpreted as brother. Immediately after explaining his golden rule, Jesus says in verse 6, "Do not give what is holy to dogs." There it is again. "And do not throw your pearls before swine, or they will trample them underfoot and turn and maul you." This is not a tolerant, expansive ministry or a message. It is an elitist, and it's insular. In the final chapter of the last book of the Bible, the literary acid trip that is the book of Revelation, Jesus points out that his followers will be in the kingdom of heaven, while outside are the dogs and sorcerers and fornicators, murderers and idolaters, everyone who loves and practices falsehood. Boy, that would include all Christians. But anyway, Also, according to Revelation, before Jesus returns, he'll send plagues, including locusts, but the locusts will harm only those people who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads. They were allowed to torture them for 5 months, but not to kill them. Once again, believers, followers, and core religionists are saved. Insects torture everyone else for 5 months. There's also the small matter of hell, the place of eternal torment for all who do not believe that Jesus is God. Love your neighbors, love your enemies indeed. If you are the correct religion, you get eternal bliss, if not eternal torment. Even in the seemingly open-minded and inclusive passages of the New Testament betray tribalism. Standing alone, the sentiment penned by the Apostle Paul sounds broad and inclusive. There is no longer Jew or Greek. There is no longer slave or free. There is no longer male or female. Okay. For all of you are one in Christ Jesus. But in context, this is more like the slogan of the Orwellian farm. All animals are equal, but some animals more equal than others. Exactly. Paul's version might read, everyone is equal so long as you are a Christian, for that is the true sentiment behind this passage. For in Christ Jesus you are all children of God through faith. As many of you were baptized into Christ, have clothed yourselves with Christ. There is no longer Jew or Greek. There is no longer slave or free. There is no longer male or female, for all of you are one in Christ Jesus. And if you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's offspring, heirs according to the promise. The modern attempt to portray Jesus as a bastion of equality instead of an elitist was valuable to the civil rights movement, but is belied by American history. During the civil rights movement, Jesus was also used to argue for segregation. Isn't the Bible great? You can make it say whatever you need it to say at any given moment. It's amazing. On May 23rd, 1954, the Sunday after the Supreme Court decided Brown versus Board of Education, integrating the nation's schools, Reverend Carrie Daniel of the First Baptist Church of West Dallas delivered a sermon titled God, the Original Segregationist. You know what? You can't argue with that. Jesus preached a segregationist message. I can see how you can make that make sense. Pretty wild, isn't it? When he published it in pamphlet form, it sold over 1 million copies. Like Daniel, Mississippi Presbyterian minister Guy Gillespie's A Christian View on Segregation was influential. I'll say it was widely distributed and made the same arguments, drawing on the Bible for support. Bob Jones, the evangelist and founder of the eponymous religious school, infamously declared that segregation was scripture in his 1960 Easter sermon. If you are against segregation and against racial separation, then you are against God. Because the real Bible does not condone slavery, except, yes, it does. In fact, it gives you exact, detailed instructions on how to do slavery and who counts as a slavery and how long you can keep a slave. Even if you're in the in crowd, you get to keep people as slaves, even if they're a part of your tribe, but you have to let them go at the year of Jubilee after 7 years. But you can get 7 years of work out of them. That's Old Testament. But you can keep believing that. At the height of the Montgomery bus boycott, the Montgomery City Council issued a statement saying that it will forever stand like a rock against racial equality, intermarriage, and mixing of the races in schools, and rooted its intransigence in religion. There must continue the separation of the races under God's creation and plan. The city of Montgomery, Carrie, Gillespie, Jones, and their brethren drew support from both the Old and New Testaments. Reverend T. Roberts Ingram of St. Thomas Episcopal Church of Houston thought segregation was simply applied Christianity. According to one scholar, the most complete and devastating discriminatory practice that can ever be exercised. wrote Ingram, are those of Jesus Christ. In a pamphlet entitled Jesus, Master Segregationist, Lawrence Neff, a Methodist minister in Atlanta, noted that Jesus sent out his disciples with instructions to avoid the Gentiles. The 70s called, they want their haircut back. No, I'm not giving it back. It's mine now. I'm keeping it. It's mine. All mine. And I'm just here to annoy you with it. Okay? Thank you for joining. Let's see. Okay. I have to go back because, again, Jesus sent out his disciples with instructions to avoid Gentiles and Samaritans, to preach only to Jews. Neff had support of the New Testament, as we just seen. In his second letter to the Corinthians, Paul quotes the Hebrew Bible and reminds Christians to be separate from them, the unbelievers, says the Lord, and touch nothing unclean. Even Alabama Governor George Wallace, in his 1963 inaugural speech, which is also known as the Segregation Now, Segregation Forever speech, called on the Christian God in Jesus Christ. Fearful of integration, Wallace attacked the federal government as the instrument that would destroy segregation. He argued that we are become government-fearing people, not God-fearing people. We find we have replaced faith with fear. Though we may give lip service to the Almighty, in reality, government has become our God. The politician is to change the status from the servant of the people to master of the people, to play at being God without faith in God and without the wisdom of God. It is a system in which I can't even read it. You can just hear the Christian ignorance. It's gross. It is a system that is the very opposite of Christ, for it feels and encourages everything degenerate and base in our people, as it assumes the responsibility that we ourselves should assume. He then drew the line in the dust and tossed the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny and uttered the notorious line, I say segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. Trump supporters are often driven by a longing for this bygone era. I wonder why. Because it's in a book makes you believe it. Believe what? You'll have to be clear, Levy. Thank you for the gifts. I appreciate that. Thank you for the follow. Let's see. Like I said, Democrats ain't been this mad since Lincoln freed their slaves. Really? Then why are Republicans so dead set on restricting the right to vote? Why are they trying to disenfranchise Black people so much? It's like they miss the 50s. They want to go back to before the Civil Rights era. Talk to a MAGA, and they'll tell you, when the woman was in the home, when the woman was barefoot, pregnant, and in the kitchen, I mean, they tell on themselves. They want to go back to the 50s. It's almost as if the Republican and Democratic Party switched ideologies. All of the racial segregationists were not comfortable in the Democratic Party, so they went Republican in the 70s. But yeah, tell me more. Tell me more about wanting to make America great again. When exactly was that? What is the era? What is the year that MAGA wants to go back to? Tell me, what year was that? The 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s? Yeah, 2017. Yeah, right. Trump supporters are often driven by a longing by this bygone era when religion supported their racism and they could claim to be superior to others simply by looking at the color of their skin, not the content of their character. Christian nationalism is inextricably tied up in this bigotry and longing for a restoration to a racist golden age. Remember, it was not economic anxiety or even racism that was the best predictor of a 2016 Trump voter. It was Christian nationalism. It's easy for Christian nationalists to sweep aside anything that might be construed as sentiments about treating strangers and foreigners as if they were natives, as in Leviticus 19, because most of the Bible, including the New Testament, backs up their scriptural interpretation. The Washington Post profiled a small town congregation hearing a series of sermons on the Ten Commandments in Alabama in July 2018. The Post recounted an exchange between two congregants. These followers of Donald Trump are the everyday Christian nationalists that carried Trump into office. They implicitly understand this us versus them interpretation of their book, meaning the Bible. Love thy neighbor meant love thy American neighbor. Welcome the stranger meant the legal immigrant stranger. The Bible says, if you do this to the least of these, you do it to me. Sheila said, quoting Jesus, but the least of these are Americans, not the ones crossing the border. In the minds of these Christian nationalists, Trump woke a sleeping Christian nation that is threatened by unpapered people. And the Bible justifies bigotry against such people. After all, slavery was never as bad as people said it was. Slaves were valued. They got housing. They got fed. They got medical care. The us versus them tenet of Christian nationalism is not only central to Trumpian rhetoric, but is also being promoted at the highest levels of power in a Bible study conducted by the president's cabinet for U.S. senators and for U.S. representatives. The Bible study is the reason former Attorney General Jeff Sessions cited Romans 13 to justify separating children from their parents at the America's southern border. U.S. laws incorporate prohibitions that are reflected in at least 3 of the 10 commandments: murder, theft, and lying. E.g., also, for example, fraud and perjury. However, unlike the Decalogue and the Christian nationalism with its insularity, our laws apply to everyone and do not rest on divine claims, but on an agreement of we the people. More importantly, these universal principles are not unique to Judeo-Christianity, so they fail to support the myth that America is founded on Judeo-Christian principles. It cannot be denied that our country was founded to favor a similarly small group of people, white men. True white men of various religions were welcome, but that is still a narrow group. But the ideal that America is attempting to live up to is the non-biblical principle inscribed on the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C., equal justice under law. Whereas the immutable, imperfect law of the Judeo-Christian God will forever discriminate against people who don't believe in the right God. American law comes over closer to attaining the equality ideal. God's laws holds that some people are more equal than others. American law has expanded to include men of other races, then women, and so on, until now we are finally beginning to treat people of different sexual orientations equally under the law. We have not fully realized the ideal, but at least our founders gave us room and a process to grow. Progress is possible under our founding documents, while the Bible will forever enshrine an ancient and outdated morality. Nothing in these commandments support the Christian nationalist argument. Thank you. I appreciate that. Sequel orientations get equal treatment now. Actually, no, they don't. They still don't. They're still being discriminated against. Republicans are leading the charge against. They're leading the charge of bigotry. They want to make sure that they, according to Project 2025, they want to literally wipe out LGBTQ, and they're going to use the law to do it. Perverting sex and love, the 7th commandment. You shall not commit adultery. Sex, sin, and the devil are early linked. Arthur Miller, The Crucible. Adultery is the highest invasion of property. Regina versus Malgridge, Queen's Bench, 1706. Adultery is the highest invasion of property. Think about that. Interesting. Laws regulating sex tend toward the ridiculous. Indiana and Wyoming enacted sodomy laws in the late 19th century to punish anyone who entices, allures, instigates, or aids any person under the age of 21 years to commit masturbation or self-pollution. To this day, Maryland outlaws oral sex as an unnatural or perverted sexual practice. And in Michigan, adultery is still a crime. This country has a long history of regulating and prohibiting sex. More often than not, it is a history not just of ridiculousness, but of racism, sexism, and discrimination, all actively pushed by Christian churches. The history is still being written. The Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, once called for criminalizing adultery, bemoaning the modern discomfort with a law against adultery. He, for one, did not think it an antiquated sin, but believed that the seventh commandment contained in the Ten Commandments is still a big deal. You keep voting Republican, and we're going to go right back to the 1800s. Pence is not alone. He's just not in the right century. Once upon a time, adultery was a crime and a cause for civil action in the United States. The trial that gripped the nation in the 1870s, there's always one, was newspaper editor Theodore Tilton's lawsuit against his mentor and pastor, the famous abolitionist minister who preached about God's love, Reverend Henry Ward Beecher, for criminal conversation. Basically, Tilton sued Beecher in civil court for $100,000 for committing adultery with his wife. Whether this history of legislating sex is essential to the American founding is unclear, but the Judeo-Christian influence on legislating sexual mores is undeniable and, on this chapter concedes, can be legitimately claimed by Christian nationalists. But upon that history, shame, not a country, should be built. And therefore, this commandment demands special attention, even though, like the 6th, 8th, and 9th commandments, it applies only to one's co-religious. How big was the silver spoon you were born with? Man, I don't even think I had a spoon. We grew up pretty poor. But yeah, believe what you want. The biblical prohibition on adultery is narrow. It is certainly not as broad as most read it today. Biblically speaking, the prohibition did not pertain to all believers. It applied only to married women. The married woman and her sexual partner were both considered adulterers. But if her husband slept around or even took another wife, as Abraham, Jacob, Solomon, David, Gideon, and Moses all did, he was not an adulterer. According to the Jewish Encyclopedia, adultery is sexual intercourse of a married woman with any man other than her husband. The crime can be committed only by and with a married woman. Interesting. But the unlawful intercourse of a married man with an unmarried woman is not technically adultery in Jewish law. The encyclopedia clarifies that a husband can have sex with women other than his wife without breaking God's commandment. The ancient Jewish law, as well as other systems of law which grew out of a patriarchal state of society, does not recognize the husband's infidelity to his marriage vows as a crime. A man was an adulterer when he slept with another man's wife. Essentially, adultery was a crime against a husband because husbands owned their wives. This raises the question of why a God that passed a prohibition on adultery designed to prevent married women from straying would have chosen a married woman to bear his son. But that is not for me to answer. It may even be fair to say that Christianity is founded on adultery. Joseph and Mary were betrothed with solemn espousals when she was found to be with child, a child that was not Joseph's. As two scholars on the role of women in the ancient world, Mitchell Carroll and the Reverend Alfred Brattain, have noted that betrothal and those espousals are as sacred as marriage. The woman was not allowed to withdraw from the contract, and the man could not fail to fulfill his promise unless he gave her a former bill of divorcement for cause, as in the case of marriage. The laws relating to adultery were applicable. If that is true, the whole of Christianity may be predicated on Mary's adultery. Of course, the Bible and therefore Judeo-Christianity's obsession, and that the word is used with all its unhealthy connotations with sex, is not limited to adultery. The adultery commandment is just a symptom of that broader preoccupation. The Bible demands that we shun fornication. Every sin that a person commits is outside the body, but the fornicator's sin against the body itself. It also prohibits homosexuality, cross-dressing, sex while or with a partner who is menstruating. Masturbation, lying about your virginity, but only if you're female. Being raped, the bestiality, an excellent prohibition with a punishment that demands the death of yet another innocent victim. Both human and the animals are killed. That's pretty sad. Many of the sex regulations are as sexist as they are absurd. The Bible declares that menstruating women are unclean, but allows polygamy. Fathers may sell their daughters into sexual slavery, but only to another Israelite. Soldiers may sexually enslave any female virgins after they've killed the virgin's men. Men can get away with rape if they pay the victim's family 50 shekels and then marry the victim. There are many prohibitions against having sex with family members, but men have a duty to impregnate the wives of their dead brothers. Biblical heroes even trade in flesh. David purchased a wife by giving his future father-in-law, King Saul, 100 foreskins of the king's enemies. Yeah, I mean, this is great. These are stories we read to children. I mean, I remember hearing this story in Sunday school class. Gross. The Bible authors also demanded, as part of the covenant with God, that all males have a part of their genitals removed. Do you realize that you are talking about the Old Testament and that all has been done away with? It shouldn't have been a thing in the beginning. If it's disgusting now, it should have been disgusting then. If it's wrong to do now, it was wrong to do then. You didn't go to Sunday school unless it was alternative education. What the fucking fuck? Okay. This is my covenant, which you shall keep between me and your offspring after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskins, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. Throughout your generations, every male among you shall be circumcised when he is 8 days old, including the slaves. Any uncircumcised male who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin shall be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. Any of you men circumcised out there? By a show of hands, how many of you men are circumcised? Ask yourself why. I guarantee you it's probably 90% of all men in here. No one is saying that it wasn't wrong, but Christ paid for all of it. No, that's not how that worked. Christ didn't pay for all of what happened in the Old Testament. It was actually commanded as my God, even the Apostle Paul talks about how it was righteous for these men to do what these men did. It was their act of, you read the book of Hebrews. I mean, he paid for all sin. Okay, so what? Who cares? If Jesus is God, that means he was God in the Old Testament. Can you imagine Jesus drowning babies in the flood? Jesus commanded the Israelites to massacre entire families, wipe them all out, kill them all. That was Jesus. They had it coming. Yeah, I know. You probably say that about rape victims too. They had it coming. They had it coming. They were wearing tight form-fitting clothes. They had it coming. They were out at night. Said every rapist ever. Cut off from his people. In this instance is both an unfortunate pun and a regular biblical punishment that meant killing or banishing the person. Other books of the Bible reiterate the divine covenant's demand for an ounce of flesh. Even the New Testament advocates it. Paul circumcises Timothy. Well, that doesn't sound like much was changed. Remember, Jesus paid it all, but we're going to still continue observing Jewish rituals. The Christian Bible tries to halt the biblical sex craze by endorsing celibacy. Ooh. He is a God of justice. No, justice is actually fair and balanced. God is a dictator, basically saying, might makes right. I will decide, and it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. If I say it, it's right. That's not justice. You cannot put God and justice in the same sentence. It's an oxymoron. But good try. Let's see. Sexual immorality. Where did I leave off? Christian Bible tries to halt the sex craze by endorsing celibacy. Yeah, that'll go over well. Recognizing that sexual immorality is unlikely to stop, Paul concedes that people may get married, even though it would be better if they remain unmarried and celibate like him. So no, he's not a God of justice. He is a God of dictatorship. So, yeah. That God can fuck himself, by the way. He's a weak, whiny, petulant, complaining all the time. Oh, they're not worshiping me. They're not loving me the way that they should. They're not putting me first. Me. He sounds like Donald Trump. Have you noticed that? The God of the Old Testament, the whiny little bitch, sounds like Donald Trump. It's amazing to me how godlike Trump is. He's like the God of the Old Testament without the superpowers. But yeah, I mean, the God of the Old Testament was weak and impotent. He really was. He had humans do all of his dirty work, except for special cases. But yeah, I mean, what a shitty God. Why would you want to worship a Canaanite deity? This is what I don't get. Why would you want to worship a war god that clans and tribes worshipped way back when? Even the Egyptians they wanted nothing to do with that Canaanite mess. Yuck. Bloodthirsty God of war, always demanding that his people show allegiance to him and wipe out anybody I disapprove of. Doesn't matter, just wipe them all out. And this is a God you want to worship, and this is a God you're telling me I'm going to answer to? Keep it. Let's see. Yes. Okay, don't get married, but if you have to, go ahead. There might actually be a twisted sort of logic to religious leaders imposing these rules on followers. Perhaps the true rationale behind the sexual commandments. Light Show says, the only reason you don't like him is because you are a self-involved, self-obsessed narcissist. No, you're describing the God of the Old Testament. He's self-absorbed. He's obsessed with worship. I don't want anybody to worship me. I don't even want anybody in this chat to love me and serve me. Can you imagine if I started this live and all of you started singing praises to me, love for me, and just kept praising me as I'm reading and looking at the chat? All I see is praising and worship. I would get weirded out. The reason I don't like your God is because I have a conscience. I actually know the difference between right and wrong. I don't base right and wrong based on the dictates of a book supposedly inspired by a deity. I have too much respect for my fellow men and women and others to worship this disgusting, despicable God. I'm sorry. I have too much self-respect to do something like that. I cannot debase myself. So, yeah. Who decided what's right and what's wrong? It's called science. Yes, even pagan religions and pagan people who worship other deities, they'd figured out that in order to have a successful, thriving society, we need a set of rules that protect each other, that protects us all. Imagine the veil of ignorance. Would you rather be born as you or somebody else? I can enjoy my mythology without pretending it's history. A perfect God has the right to require worship. No, actually, a perfect God would not want worship or require worship because he is perfect. He is all-knowing. He doesn't need to be deified. He doesn't need to be worshipped and extolled and praised. You don't understand what perfect is. You've got a twisted, weird version. Well, you're a Christian. I mean, that's par for the course. It goes without saying. Worship is not a virtue. It's actually a vice. Yeah, well, You're perfect. Well, no. I mean, think you guys would weird me out if all you did was sing praises to me and quote passages of worship to me in the chat. If everybody did that, I probably would end the live. I I don't think I could handle it. That's the difference between me and your God. Don't you dare. Yeah, please. Let's all do it. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Libby. Thanks a lot. Thanks for playing along. Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry. Anybody with self-respect, unless you're Donald Trump, you would get weirded out by something like that. That would be crazy. That's insane. Do not worship me, please. Stop this. What God would want to listen to that for eternity? I worship your hair. Okay, all right. That you can worship the hair, but no more. Um, I mean, what the hair does what it wants to do. I have no control over it. One way it's this way, one way it's that way. It just does whatever it wants. I give up. But again, think about it. What kind of a twisted, ridiculous psychopath would want to listen to worship and praise for all eternity? Imagine, for all eternity, all you're hearing is, "Oh, you were so wonderful. You were so great. We love you. Oh, you're the greatest." I mean, think about that. Think about that. For as long as you've lived, if that's all you heard from everybody around you, day in and day out, wouldn't that bother you? Think about it. A perfect holy God would not demand that. I'm sorry. A war God who's obsessed with worship, who wants to be glorified every time, that's not a perfect God. That's a pagan deity. I mean, hell, sounds like Zeus or Thor. And even they didn't demand that. I don't know. Okay, I've got to finish this chapter. We've got just a couple more pages and then we're done. And then you'll be done with me. Zeus is Jesus. Nowhere in the Bible does God require praise from man. Sel, you need to reread your Bible, because there are Christians in this chat that will contradict you and would set you straight. If you want to be more accurate, Hercules as Jesus. More like Jercules, but anyway. Yes, I said it. Jesus was a jerk. Okay, he was. And we just read it. So if you have missed other chapters from this book, I started from the very beginning 3 years ago. I have a YouTube channel called Skeptically G. If you want to go back and listen to the first chapters, you can find it all there. So I started this book 3 years ago. Did you know that they still called Roman historian Josephus reported about historical Hercules also? I don't think so. I mean, I have the collected works of Josephus here. I don't think he mentions Hercules as a historical figure, but I mean, I could be wrong. I could have Skeptically G on YouTube. Skeptically G. That's where I'm live right now. I'm live on YouTube. Please, I need followers. Subscribe to my channel, please. Do it or I'll smite you. I'm the God of the Old Testament. If you don't follow me, if you don't follow my YouTube channel, I shall smite you. You're not worthy of me. That's your God. I'm sorry. This is what you worship. Well, skeptically looking, that's actually, yeah, that's the handle, but the name is Skeptically G. Yeah. If you are God, could you have a partial rapture before the next election? A partial rapture? You mean rapture all the Christians? What do I do with them? What am I going to do with them? My God. Where should I put them if I rapture all the Christians? Take all the self-righteous Republicans. Have you ever seen Superman won the original 1979, 80. What was that thing? The three General Zod and his two minions. They were banished from the planet Krypton. Maybe put them in that kind of a one-dimensional space and send them out into space. Okay. Okay, religious leaders, twisted logic. Okay, perhaps the true rationale behind the sexual commandments and Christians' unnatural enthusiasm for celibacy is not to curb immorality, but rather to guard the primacy of one's relationship with religion. Jesus has to be more important than anything else, including your husband, wife, or lover. He said so himself. I have come to set man against his father and a daughter against her mother. His followers' love and attention must be directed toward Jesus first. Families can have what is left over. Yeah. I actually lived that verse growing up. I was raised in this cult of Jesus first, everything else is second. Destroying relationships that elevate loyalty to one another above loyalty to the leader is typical in totalitarian systems. In Orwell's 1984, Winston and Julia betray each other and repudiate their love while being tortured by the Ministry of Love, a title that some applied to Jesus' ministry. Of all the agencies operated by Big Brother, the Ministry of Love was really a frightening one. Its goal was not merely to prevent men and women from forming loyalties, which it might not be able to control. Its real undeclared purpose was to remove all pleasure from the sexual act. Sex is a threat to the leader. All marriages between party members had to be approved, and though the principle was never clearly stated, permission was always refused. If the couple concerned gave the impression of being physically attracted to one another, the only recognized purpose of marriage was to beget children. Sexual intercourse was to be looked on as a slightly disgusting minor operation, like having an enema. There are even organizations such as Junior Anti-Sex League, which advocate complete celibacy for both sexes. Imagine being so obsessed with sex that it's all you think about. We got to ban it. We got to do this. We got to do that. Ugh. Sterilizing sex and degrading that lovely and loving act to the lowest form of uncontrolled reproduction should ring familiar bells for Christians, particularly those raised in more conservative churches. Sex, when done properly, fosters and improves loving relationships, creating loyalty outside of the church. Judeo-Christianity's and Big Brother's goals are chillingly similar. Trying to kill the sex instinct, or if it could not be killed, then to distort it and dirty it to ensure loyalty to the leader, not to one another. The Catholic Church uses the same rationale to control its priests. According to Catholic law, Canon 277, clerics are bound to celibacy, which is a special gift of God by which sacred ministers can adhere more easily to Christ with an undivided heart and are able to dedicate themselves more freely to the service of God and humanity. An undivided heart is preferred because the church and its God do not want followers to love anyone in this world above the church. Allowing them to do so weakens the church. Clerical celibacy dates back to at least 300 CE, when, according to the Catholic Church, it decided that all clerics who exercise a ministry must abstain from relations with their wives and must not beget children. Those who do are to be removed from clerical state. Jesus himself lays down the most vile and controlling sexual law by making it impossible to obey the adultery commandment. But I say to you that anyone or everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. This commandment, then, at least as interpreted by Jesus, is meant to make believers feel guilty, and in so doing builds their spiritual debt. Lusty, guilty sinners are bound more tightly to the person who can expiate their sin. Jesus, and later to his deputies, the priestly caste, every time they think of having sex, that perpetual guilt binds people to their church and is the basis of thought crime, which appears undisguised in the first commandment. That sad legal catalog. Oh, 69 people are in this room. with all its totalitarian leanings, has infected American law. Judeo-Christianity presumes the power, intelligence, and feasibility of legislating the bedroom behavior of two consenting adults. And this arrogance has been responsible for immense pain. See, God was sending a sign earlier. Okay? It must have been God. And this arrogance has been responsible for immense pain and discrimination throughout American history. Until 1967, penalties for miscegenation, mixed race sex. Oh, no wonder I don't know that word. Relationships or marriages were common and had been since the colonial period. Hugh Davis in 1630 received the earliest recorded punishment in the colonies for lying with a Negro. Davis was soundly whipped before an assembly of, I'm just going to say black people and other, for abusing himself to the dishonor of God and to the shame of Christians by defiling his body in lying with a black person. Which fault he is to acknowledge next Sabbath day. Notice that this crime had no victim. Rather, it was a crime against God and against other Christians who were not involved or harmed. The unconstitutional and anti-miscegenation law and the Supreme Court struck down in 1967 in the famous Loving versus Virginia case was similarly based on religion. As the trial judge explained, Almighty God has created the races, white, black, yellow, Malay, and red, and he placed them on separate continents. So what the fuck were Europeans doing going over to the New World and colonizing North America? If we had already been put on different continents by God, then the Native Americans should have been able to live and thrive here. Why did we come here? This was not the continent that God placed us on, right? I'm just looking for a little consistency here. That's all. And he placed them on separate continents. The fact that he separated the races shows that he did not intend for the races to mix, except when Europeans decided to colonize the African continent and China, and to take, in the Philippines, the Koreas, Burma, Myanmar, it was okay then. It's okay when you're colonizing, when you are stripping the land of resources for yourself. Oh, then it's okay. It's okay. Yeah. Another example of Judeo-Christian sexual legislation is America's history of discrimination against homosexuals. The District of Columbia Court of Appeals wrote in 1976, there is no dispute that religious forces motivated the original laws proscribing sodomitic acts. When the Supreme Court initially upheld laws criminalizing sodomy, in 1986, the Bowers versus Hardwick, Chief Justice Warren Burger wrote that decisions of individuals relating to homosexual conduct have been subject to state intervention throughout the history of Western civilization. Condemnation of those practices is firmly rooted in Judeo-Christian moral and ethical standards. Yeah. When the court overturned these prohibitions in 2003, it disagreed with the Bowers outcome, but did not dispute the religious nature of such prohibitions. Well, there's no dispute. That's why. The majority confirmed that the condemnation of homosexuality had been shaped by religious belief. That is the only way you get to that. Religious indoctrination. And cited a historiography article that argued the primary historical justification for penalizing crimes against nature reaches back to the early Christian era and the Middle Ages. Following the lead of St. Paul, early church fathers synthesized ideas from Christianity's Jewish heritage and Roman context to create a regime whereby sex and pleasure of the body were considered presumptively suspect, morally valuable only when engaged for procreative purposes within marriage. This is where the Republicans want to take us back to. I hope you're understanding this. This is why when a vote for Republicans is a vote against yourself and a vote to take America back. This is the Republican platform. They don't want to go forward. They want to go backwards. And they want to go as far back as the people will allow. Because eventually what happens is after generation, each, each following generation gets more and more used to the idea of this Orwellian nightmare. Whereas we in this chat would probably be horrified if we lived under these edicts. But your children and their children and their children, if this is what they're brought up in, if this is all they know, they could get used to it very, very fast. Yeah. So a vote for Republican is a vote for this monstrosity. Make America great again. Again, when was it great? I have yet to see I've yet to hear a MAGA tell me exactly when America was great. They'll allude to it, but they'll never give you a date of exactly where they want to go back. And then the ones that are brave enough and stupid enough to actually give you a date, then you can go back and say, okay, well, during this period, here's what was happening. Why would you want to go back to that? Thank you so much for the gifts. The Bowers Court reliance on Judeo-Christian principles was historically accurate, but legally wrong. American courts cannot uphold laws for religious reasons, nor can our government legislate religion. Keep voting Republican and you'll find out how false that is. The government must make valid secular reasons for its legislation. When overturning Bowers, the court wrote, the issue is whether the majority may use the power of the state to enforce religious beliefs on the whole society through operation of the criminal law. The court concluded that Bowers was not correct when it was decided, and it is not correct today. It ought not to remain binding precedent. Bowers versus Hardwick should be, and now is, overruled. Judeo-Christian principles reared up in the push to criminalize sodomy, but also in the attempt to ban gay marriage. When the Supreme Court overturned the Defense of Marriage Act in 2013, it noted that the House of Representatives intended DOMA to express both moral disapproval of homosexuality and a moral conviction that heterosexuality better comports with traditional, especially Judeo-Christian morality. A sentiment correctly struck from our laws. What goes on in the bedroom of two consenting adults is no business of the state. When the state does intrude, it is often with a law based on Judeo-Christian principles, like those embodied in the Seventh Commandment. The influence of these principles cannot be denied, but such laws are a shameful part of America's past, and the sooner we purge the venomous influence, the better. In a way, even this influence proves the larger point of this book. Judeo-Christian's influence leads to unconstitutional laws that courts are forced to strike down because Judeo-Christian principles conflict with the higher principles of our Constitution. Justice Harry Blackmun, in his powerful dissent in Bowers, made the same point. The assertion that traditional Christian values prescribe sodomy cannot provide an adequate justification for the law. That's certain, but by no means all religious groups condemn the behavior as issued gives the state no license to impose their judgments on the entire citizenry. The legitimacy of secular legislation depends instead of whether the state can advance some justification for its law beyond its conformity to religious doctrine. Thus, far from buttressing his case, petitioner's invocation of Leviticus, Romans, and St. Thomas Aquinas and sodomy's heretical status during the Middle Ages undermines his suggestion that the law represents a legitimate use of secular coercive power. A state can no more punish private behavior because of religious intolerance than it can punish such behavior because of racial animus. The American government cannot punish citizens for violating religious laws, and all citizens are freer and a society better for this. Judeo-Christian principles have corrupted our laws, but the greater constitutional principles are finally rooting out and eliminating their poisonous effects. Not fast enough. We had a chance But we decided fascism was the way to go, didn't we? Congratulations, America. We decided to go backwards. So, what did you think of that reading? Did you get anything out of it? Anybody want to join the conversation? Mm, yeah. But yeah, I enjoy these readings. We're at chapter 21 now. We're getting to the end of the book. We're almost there. And then I'm going to move on to another one. But yeah, this is why I do these lives, because it forces me to read. Because once I've committed, it's like, yeah, well, you started it. What are you going to do? Quit? So it forces me to read this book that I've had for 4.5 years. Actually, when was this book written? Let's see. 2019. 2019. Wow. What a time. Almost seems quaint now. After we've had a pandemic, after we've had little just unrest and ridiculous shenanigans. The religious right is dying in this country, and they are not letting go. They are going to go down screaming and screeching, and they're going to spread as much disinformation as they can. They're trying to win the next generation of men. I should just call them boys because they're not any more men than a 12-year-old. Now you got incels and MGTOWs and people whining and crying about how women live their lives. And I'll tell you what, if we keep voting Republican, you're going to find out that women are going to lose their right to vote. They've already lost autonomy over their own bodies in some states. You know, a 13-year-old in Mississippi who was raped had to carry the rapist's baby at 13 years of age in Mississippi. This is what we're doing. This is the insanity in this country. She's not old enough to drive a car. She's not old enough to make decisions about her life. She's not old enough to have a bank account. She's not old enough to drink. She's not old enough to do a whole plethora of things, but you're going to force her to push a baby out of her. What kind of fucked up system do we have? And I bet you some of the Christians that were in this chat earlier would say, well, pro-life. No, it's called your forced birth. Your pro-forced birth. It has nothing to do with pro-life. If you were pro-life, you would be screaming about ICE. You would be screaming against the treatment of children who have been thrown in detention camps, who are being separated from their parents. You're not pro-life. There's nothing pro-life about you. You're pro-ideology. You're pro-right wing. You're pro-torture. You're pro-cruelty. Cruelty is what feeds you. There are exceptions in extreme cases, aren't there? Not unless you live in a blue state where abortion has been enshrined into law. In Texas, no. There exceptions? What exceptions? In Mississippi, no. No. They literally forced a 13-year-old. She was 12 at the time, and by the time she delivered, she was 13. And the doctor that saw her could not believe this girl. I mean, she just had no idea what was going on with her. They brought her in. The mother brought her in because she thought she was sick. She was vomiting, this and that. And so she was like, okay, I got to get her checked out. I don't know what's going on with my daughter, only to find out she was pregnant because of her rapist. This is what we're doing in this country. We're forcing children to have babies. Sick. And any of you Christians, you haven't spoken out about that. You need a job. This is all you think about. Well, you know what? Someone's got to. Someone's got to think. Someone's got to be doing the thinking, because obviously you aren't. Yeah, let these pro-life people take care of the children. Yeah, I don't see any pro-lifers. There was a pro-life group, a forced birth group protesting outside of a Planned Parenthood, but none of them ever protested against the treatment of migrant children and asylum seekers. They didn't, not a word. Don't care. They're not part of our tribe. They're not in our group. Therefore, they're not our brothers or sisters or neighbors. Remember from earlier, chapter 19? We just read it. The Bible doesn't say love everybody. It says love your neighbor, love the people in your group. Everyone else, they're expendable. And this same genocidal attitude has been infiltrated and has been palmated, and it's to the point where this neurosis has just taken hold of a huge portion of our people. But this is where we're at. This is where we're at. But ladies, I'm telling you, you are going to lose your rights very, very rapidly if this continues. You keep voting Republican, and this is what we get. Oh, by the way, men, don't think this won't touch you. You know, women thought the white women thought that they were above it, that they wouldn't be affected by this decision making. Little did they know, little did the white women know that this would reach unto them. And now there are members of our elected officials, white women who were MAGA supporting, have been removed from their committee assignments to make room for men. You see what's happening? They want them removed so that men, MAGA men, they want the rule of law to be supreme for men, and then white women on the bottom, and then everybody else following. This is what they've been working on. This is Project 2025 Manifest. But yeah, keep fucking with MAGA, keep fucking with nationalism, and this is what we're going to get in this country. We're going to lose the right to do much of anything unless it's pre-approved by dear leader. Yeah, this is where we're headed. Autocracy. Or I should say kakistocracy. You know, a country ruled by the least intelligent, the least informed, and the least knowledgeable. Kakistocracy. Say that fast 3 times. Get to know it. Learn it, love it, live it. Well, I've done enough ranting and raving for one day. I'll come back again and read some more of the book. You'll have more ramblings from me then, but I'll give it a rest for now. Thank you so much for joining the Biblical History Skeptics, now known as Skeptically Speaking. Thank you so much. I appreciate this. And it all goes back to egg hoarding. Okay. But yeah, so if you can, please jump over to YouTube. Follow my YouTube channel. I could always use more followers. Look for Skeptically Speaking on YouTube. I would appreciate it. I need 50 followers so I can start going live from my phone so I don't have to depend on my desktop. This is kind of restrictive. So, first world problems, whining. Anyway, take care. We'll see you on the flip side.